Well, it's been a week. I just feel like the world is fucking exploding right now. Like everything's going up in goddamn flames. Everyone's pissed off at everyone else. Bunch of wars going on. I guess it's all just the furtherance of entropy. It's bound to happen sooner or later. Also, living in a social cocoon doesn't exactly help, which has been that way for like the past goddamn month. What are we gonna do about it? Absolutely nothing. I also realized last night that I have almost as many subscribers as Foam and Sand, which feels almost criminal. Like, I don't do shit, barely create anything. This guy's over here making magical music to lull me into the goddamn dreamscapes of my mind. Laying in bed listening to that shit and mapping out the inner pathways and neurons firing and what I actually read an article the other week. It was by a group of neuroscientists that had been conducting like a 10-year experiment, and they're all coming to the conclusion that free will is essentially just an illusion, which is kind of something I had considered for a long time. It's like we are really just a mix of things that have happened to us, our reaction to those things, and how they will affect us when we perceive an event that is eerily similar, or that we perceive to be eerily similar, even if it's not. So, really, it's all just a mathematical equation of you did this time, so you're probably going to do this time. Not to say that people can't change, but you need to be actively thinking about that stuff. Like you need to be have an active brain process rather than just a reactive brain process. Because if you're just having a reactive brain process, you're essentially just following your scripting. So how do you do that? I guess in a way it can drive you crazy, but you have to maintain a second sort of parallel to everything you think. That always brings up the question, well, why did I think of it that way? Why did I consider it that way? And then you have to examine that from that second perspective and be like, all right, maybe I did it because of these things that I had been through, or my previous reaction to something like this, or maybe this is how I handled the situation. And you need to constantly check yourself too. Like, am I, is this a correct thought? Is this, is this being influenced by anything else in my past, or is this being influenced by too much by my emotions? You really have to cut that down. So if you're in an emotional situation, it's easier said than done because anyone who gets into an emotional situation isn't thinking, they're reacting. And a lot of people don't realize that, I think. That you need to stop, kill the emotion, and examine what you're saying and why you're saying it and who you're saying it to and the context and all that shit. So I guess this is all just to say I read a bunch of articles relating to the nature of free will, and the general consensus, as it has been among developing scientists, is that free will is more of an illusion than anything. We're just sort of like a scripted entity floating through life, which can get some people depressed, but at the same time, it's not like you can't fight that. It's not like you can't take steps to really be introspective about what you're doing and, you know, things in that nature. I can also freely say this shit because I'm pretty sure no one's ever going to listen to it, so I don't give a shit. But, like, that's the biggest thing, isn't it? Like, we just react. We don't think. Don't stop and think. And I don't think we do enough second guessing of what we're thinking. And again, that shit can drive you crazy, and case in point, for me it has. But if you're careful with it, and you're not like constantly feeding into that voice, let's call it, which is thought. Thought is voice in your head, you know. But for some people, and I was explaining this one night, how things like dissociative identity disorders, things of that nature, where things that I have, you know, tangential experience. So, I mean, God, I've been in maybe 4 different mental hospitals in the course of my life for varying amounts of time. The longest period was like over a month, and I've sat with people and talked with people with various ailments through group therapy sessions, things like that. So, I think I have a fair, decent insight into not only the way that a healthy mind thinks, but that varying degrees of what would be considered eccentric or unhealthy minds think. Had an hour-long conversation once, sitting at a table with a guy who had various panic disorders. I remember having a long conversation with him. He had various tics and things, so I could get a pretty good read on when he was kind of falling out of the conversation or experiencing a delusion or something like that. So I would pause and just kind of let him take his time. Or, you know, the girl that had borderline personality disorder. She was a cutter. She used to be out in the... Because I was at the time was suffering from a variety of things, but various alters. So I would walk out into the... one of them liked to wake up very early, usually around like 4 or 5 a.m., do a bit of meditating, and then go out and drink some coffee. As soon as... I was always the first one up, but she used to hang out in there sometimes, so we'd have a lot of conversations and things like that. This one girl, that older woman, actually, she had a variety of panic disorders. I recognized those pretty easily. That's something I grew up with. There was a whole variety of different types and personalities integrating with each other, and I've done that so many times over the past decades where it's like, I think the people who understand brains the best are both, not to sound like an asshole or like an egocentric, but people who tend to understand brains the best are both people who suffer from various mental illnesses their entire life, or psychiatrists. And you'd also be surprised at how often that overlaps. God. I've had some interesting psychiatrists, I'll tell you that. But is there a point to all this? I don't know. Probably not. It's probably just me trying to think of something to say. Just to get a voice out in some form or fashion somewhere. So yeah, what's the point? Let's find the point. The main point, I guess I was saying, is that We're all victims to the inner labyrinths in our own heads. But sometimes you gotta check yourself, step back, and say, hey, what the fuck's going on in there? You know? You know. This is all foam and sand, by the way. So, if you like it, Should probably go subscribe to him. Considering like he only has like 100 more subscribers than me, which is utterly insane to me. Granted,